Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Macro Talk. It is, I don't know, Tuesday, the 17th of March. Does that sound right to you? I have no idea anymore. The days go by so fast. Today we are finishing up what we started last week, and what I didn't quite get to conclude with, which was my summary of the comparison between the Mitutoyo microscope objective and the Zeiss Luminar, a photomacrographic lens. And the results were, I don't know, a little disappointing, a little surprising maybe. We'll see. We'll see what you think. The pictures that I have are terrible because I have been rushing like a madman all day long to try to get these pictures together, and my computer decided this was the perfect day to slow down when it was using Lightroom and to a lesser extent Xering. Just had all kinds of niggly little problems today. Anyway, we have coming up this week on Thursday, we're going to talk about compositing. Not about necessarily just macro compositing, just having fun with the camera and some images. We're going to talk about a few of the techniques. It occurred to me that compositing the way we used to do it might not be around for too much longer. With all of this AI stuff coming out, it's going to do it all for us, but I thought it would be worth taking a look at some of the skills and seeing what you thought. So that's what we're going to do on Thursday at Macro Talk 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And let me see, what else do we have this week? Tangent on Saturday, 10 o'clock in the morning until 11:30 in the morning. Larry and I will be talking about various subjects related to 3D modeling, 3D printing. I may even have my beard trimmed by then. That would be one of my goals for this week. It's been quite the week. A lot of stuff to take care of, and I still haven't done my taxes. If anybody read my article, that was aspirational. I was supposed to have done them by the time the article dropped, but I didn't. So I'll be doing them tomorrow, as I said, every day last week. Okay, so where are we? What happened last week was, on Thursday, I did a comparison of two lenses that are considered macro classics. One of them is an infinity conjugate microscope objective that you're all very familiar with, the Mitutoyo M-Plan, a metallurgic objective that is infinity conjugate, meaning it's made to operate on newer microscopes. It needs a tube lens. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of gear. It's very expensive, something like $2,500 for one of those. Hang on, I'm getting a message from a sponsor. Nope, that was not what I thought it was. Whenever anybody who watches my live stream texts me early in the stream, I assume it's because you can't hear me. But apparently you can, so there you go, no problems. Where was I? Oh, talking about the Mitutoyo M-Plan. They're very expensive, and they're very beautiful, and they do a fantastic job. The competitor in this is a lens that has been around for a long time, made by Zeiss. It's kind of like a microscope lens, only it has an aperture, and it's finite conjugate, meaning it doesn't need a tube lens. All it needs is a tube, some empty space between the lens and the sensor. And I went into this comparison thinking I knew a good amount about both lenses. It turns out that I didn't know nearly enough about the Zeiss Luminar, the one that we tested, which was the 16mm, because I had read some material online that was misleading, and I'm going to correct some of that misunderstanding so that you don't fall into the same trap. You need to look at these lenses as being two very different beasts that were invented for very different reasons, that were used for very different reasons, and that are loved for very different reasons. Really, if I had to do this again, I probably wouldn't try to compare these two, because they're really not that comparable at the end of the day. But let's go back and talk about some of the things we did, how I looked at these and how I drew my comparisons. There are several things that got in the way of doing a nice clean comparison. For one thing, Mitutoyo does not publish MTF curves as far as I can tell, the modulation transfer function curves, and Zeiss stopped doing so several donkey's years ago, so I couldn't find them either. I found a version of the old Zeiss MTF, and I'll show that a little bit later on, and it tells me pretty much exactly what I saw in the testing. So we'll cover all of that as we go along. So these are two different lenses for two different purposes, and at two very different price points. You can find the Zeiss lens, if you're diligent. You can find them on eBay for a couple of $100. You have no idea what kind of condition they're in. You can get them in great condition from a reseller for $300 or $400. You'll be lucky if you can get the 20x M-Plan Mitutoyo for much less than $2,000. And even older ones are selling for considerably more on eBay right now. Two different lenses, two different purposes. But we are comparing the Zeiss Luminar 16mm, which is the shortest focal length version of the lens that they make, and the Mitutoyo M-Plan apochromatic 20x objective, the one that we all use, or we all would use if we could. So the big question was, First of all, in my mind, can we even compare a lens that is made for photographic reproduction, which is the purpose of the Zeiss Luminar? It's made to reproduce images shot on film, and therefore the limit of much of the resolution and the things that we're going to be looking at in our comparison is really immaterial, because these lenses were made to have a maximum function where the photographic grain interfered, and beyond that it made no difference. That's not the case with a microscope objective like the Mitutoyo, which is designed to provide far more resolution than that, because we're not dealing with film grain, we're dealing with digital sensors. We'll cover that as well in just a little bit, hopefully. So how does a top-of-the-line infinity conjugate microscope objective compare with a 40-year-old photographic or photomacrographic lens? Well, not particularly well, I would say. That at the end of the day, the images showed about what I was expecting to see, but only after I reshot them all. Let me tell you what happened. The article that I read, admittedly, was quite old, but has been cited many times as being an authority on this subject. Described the Zeiss 16mm Luminar as being a lens that was that had a range of magnifications in which it performed well between 10x and 40x. That is a dramatic range, and it didn't seem right to me when I read that. It seemed, in fact, frankly, impossible that a lens could have adequate correction at 10x and still be able to perform at 40x. It seemed a bit nonsensical, but I went with that and decided to compare this lens to the 20x Mitutoyo, because it meant I could utilize the Luminar at 20x just by changing the amount of tube space between the lens and the sensor, which I did. And I set up my test platform so that the Luminar was giving me pretty close to exactly 20 times magnification. It was indistinguishable from the Mitutoyo in terms of how much actual magnification I was getting from the system. Problem number two I'm going to interject here. The idea when you compare lenses like this is you leave everything the same except the lens. You use the same lights, the same rail, the same stands. You don't mess with the light direction after you get going. You use the same diffusion. Everything is the same. The subject is the same. The position is the same. You can't do that when you're comparing two lenses like this, because one of them won't operate on the rig that I had set up the other one for. So I would have to change out a lens and objective setup using my micro nickel 200 as the tube lens. And when I went to the bellows with the Zeiss lens on it, it was about 4 inches higher. The optical axis was, meaning I had to move the lights. I had to move everything to allow for us to use both lenses. So these are not good comparisons. If I had to do it again, and I will do it again at some point, I'll just use the bellows throughout, and I'll just attach the tube lens and the bellows to the tube lens and the objective to the front of the bellows, and do all my testing that way. I tried to get the conditions as similar as I possibly could, so that the images would make some sense. But still, be aware of the fact that I had to change a lot of stuff between each test. So the lenses themselves, let's talk briefly about them, the differences in their optical design, because this turns out to be pretty darn important. The Luminar is a finite lens. It's really a macro lens. They call it a photomacrographic lens, but it is was made for macro photographic reproduction, for 1-to-1 or greater reproduction of images. Its optimum magnification is between actually 10 and 16x, not 10 and 40x. Where that came from is anybody's guess. And indeed, the range in which the performance of the lens would be considered optimal is much, much narrower. And that's the point I want to make. If you have one of these, or you're planning on using one of these, then at the 16 millimeter focal length, you should probably be using it at about 16 times magnification. By about, I mean you should use it at 16 times magnification. It's easy enough to set up. At 16 times magnification, that should mean you have 0.2 of a millimeter represented horizontally on a full frame camera when you have the thing properly set up. So it's pretty quick and easy to get it set up at 16x. But let me tell you, if you bump it up to 20x, all of the corrections that are built into the lens vanish, and the image quality just nosedives. Now, I don't know if this is a characteristic of the lens, or if it was just a characteristic of this particular copy of the lens, but the rapidity with which aberrations came back into the final images was staggering once you wandered away from 16. And I'd done all of my testing at 20x and was flabbergasted by how bad the pictures looked. The amount of chromatic aberration was unlike anything I've seen with some very dodgy lenses. So I was concerned about that, and relieved to find out that actually keeping the magnification a little bit lower got rid of a lot of that and brought all the corrections back into play. A word about the cool feature on the Luminar that was so attractive to me was the fact that it had an aperture, that I could adjust the aperture to give myself a little bit more depth of field, and could tune the image that way. That is not the case. At wide open, the f number is something like 68. when you're using this thing at 16x. It is a very, very diffraction prone lens. Not prone, it just causes a lot of diffraction in the image, because you've got this thing 250 millimeters away from your sensor, and it has a not a very large aperture in it anyway. It seems tiny to the camera, and you get a lot of diffraction softening. So between aberrations related to the what am I trying to say? The design of the lens, the narrow range of magnifications, the amount of chromatic aberration, the amount of spherical aberration, and the amount of diffraction on the other side. If you were to be tempted to bump up no, I should say bump down the aperture just a tad. I tried that. I tried to close the aperture just the tiniest amount to see if that would get rid of some of the aberrations before worsening the diffraction, and it didn't. It immediately worsened the diffraction and didn't really get rid of the aberrations that much until I changed magnification. So it's a complicated lens to fine tune. But the bottom line is, in my opinion, you really can't fine tune it. We're trying to use it in a way that it's not designed to be used. And as such, what do you expect? And I asked a good friend of mine who used to own one of these the 16 millimeter lenses what he thought of it, and why does he not still use it? And his answer was microscope objectives. Simple as that. The introduction of infinity conjugate microscope objectives, which are designed to scavenge every bit of resolution from the subject, because of their very high numeric aperture and their beautifully corrected optics for CA. These lenses are apochromatic, whereas the Zeiss Luminar is not. You just end up with a bad comparison. You're not going to have the same kind of imagery. So it came down to, well, what is it about the Zeiss Luminar that makes it still so popular with photographers that people will pay a big chunk of change to own one? What is it that it is doing for them that they like so much, and how does it compare in that way to the Mitutoyo? And I'm not sure I have a good answer for you, but I have some answers for you. I'm going to try to close the loop. We'll look at some of the images such as they are. And I have not had a chance, even though I have been going at this all day long since the wee hours this morning. I still don't have my pictures properly organized, so you're just going to have to bear with me and hope for the best that I can find them at the right moment here. But we'll get to that in just a second. So we were talking about the optical design. So the Zeiss Luminar is made for macro reproduction of photography. It's a macro lens. Optimal magnification, we'll say 16x, right there and leave it there. It's finite. It uses a long mechanical tube. You need 250 millimeters to give you the advertised magnification. That is a full PB6 bellows plus your adapters. Everything stretched out as far as it will go will about get you to 250. So it's a close thing. If you wanted to go any higher, which you don't, but if you did, you'd need to add some tubes or another bellows extension, which means that light in this thing is really, really precious. And the difference between the two lenses when it comes to just the practical matter of setting up the shot using the lights you have on your system just becomes a night and day different. The 20x, which I used to think was enormously difficult to use, becomes a piece of cake compared to the Luminar, where it's pitch dark unless you're shooting at an ISO of 2000 and a shutter speed of half a second or a second, which is absolutely nothing like using the Mitutoyo. It has an adjustable aperture that is absolutely worthless. It does absolutely nothing you'd ever want it to do. You can fiddle around with it and show people how the aperture works, and that's, I suppose, worth something. But as far as ever using it, you would not want to use this stop down. Even one click will just soften the picture into oblivion. It is optimized for flat objects, and it is optimized for gigantic sensors. These are two of the things that are appealing about the lens. It has a very flat field, which means you don't generally get the kind of curvature that causes a loss of sharpness at the edges. You also don't get vignetting, which is a problem with the Mitutoyo 20X on some sensors. It was not as big a problem as I expected on mine. I had some vignetting, but it was usually fairly trivial, and it was more the kind of vignetting that was a very slight darkening and a tiny bit of softening, rather than a dark curved edge to the photograph. So the Mitutoyo is designed for using with a microscope, for using with a finely tuned tube lens that will work with it to produce the image on the sensor. It does require a tube lens. There are all kinds of different tube lenses available that you can use. Some very expensive, some very inexpensive. From, as far as I know, from about $63 up to the sky's the limit. It is also a fairly flat lens. It's not quite as well corrected for spherical aberration as the Zeiss. It has a fixed numeric aperture. Obviously, the Zeiss, which has an aperture ring on it, so that you can change the aperture size, is also going to change the numeric aperture, which is very important because you need to be aware of that when you're doing calculations and trying to figure out what you're going to use the lens for. But at its wide open and 16x magnification, the Luminar has a numeric aperture that I calculated to be about 0.31, which is considerably lower aperture than the Mitutoyo. In fact, there are some documents that I found that showed the Luminar had a numeric aperture of only 0.21, which I could not get that number to come out. But if it is at 2.1 and the Mitutoyo is at 0.42, then it would mean you're getting twice the resolution out of the Mitutoyo than you do out of the Zeiss. And that certainly was close to my experience with it, comparing the two. All right, let me see. The difference between the way the light is handled is probably not really significant to this discussion, but when the light goes through the finite conjugated Zeiss objective, we'll call it an objective so I don't get confused, it goes through the lens and it is focused down onto the sensor, which is 3/4 of a mile away, and that's all you need. It's a very simple system. The infinity conjugate microscope objective from Mitutoyo requires a second lens, the tube lens, some distance into the tube, that is going to focus a ray of a set of parallel rays. It'll refocus them down onto the sensor as the image. That's the only difference. And the reason it has that is so that things can be introduced into that column of light without interfering with the light. That's what that infinity space is for. It's very useful. We use it for a lot of things like fluorescent microscopy, and for adding filters and beam splitters and things like that. You can't do that with the way the Zeiss Luminar is set up, because it's already done all of its focusing as the light is leaving the back of the lens. So all you need is space. So it's a double-edged sword. It gives you the benefit of having a simpler system, but also having much less flexibility in how you can use it. Okay, so that's the basic overall view, is that the Luminar is you can think of it as a macro lens for a camera, just a weird one that has to have a long tube. And you can think of the Mitutoyo as a microscope objective that has been hijacked by macro photographers to use as a high resolution lens for our cameras. Fair enough. Two different purposes. Now, the experimental setup that I used was a complete mishmash, and even though I went to great lengths and spent a lot of time to try to get everything set up the same, by using the same camera, which was a Z8, a Nikon Z8, the same rail, and set up exactly the same way, the same lights, the same number of lights, the same diffusion setup, and the same stacking workflow, exactly the same as I always use whenever I'm using a horizontal rail. The subjects were the same. I used a coin. I used a dime. Have you ever looked at the back of a dime? You're getting ready to. That's the front of a dime. It's got some lady's head on it. Just kidding, it's a guy's head, I think. But on the back is all of this detail. Don't look at my fingernails, look at the coin. That's upside down, but you get the idea. Full of detail. So I used that to get an idea of how it was going to deal with that kind of contrast on a reflective surface. I also used some metal wire coils, very intricate coils that give a tremendous amount of detail and really are very hard to photograph because they're shiny and they're curved and they have all kinds of issues with specularity. But I wanted a difficult subject as well as the coin, and then I photographed something else and I've completely forgotten what it was. But when we get to the photographs, I'll see, and will refresh my memory. But the pictures were unimpressive. We'll go through them, and I'll show you what I thought. Oh, computer chip. That was the other thing. I knew there was, and somehow some slime molds got into this stack of photographs, which were fun, and I wasted a full hour looking at those and stacking some of them. So they're not going to be part of this discussion, though. But we will look at the images such that they are. Such as they are. I don't think they're going to shed a whole lot of light unless you were to actually do this yourself and look at the image as they're coming off the camera and kind of get a feel for what the problems are. But I'll try to sum it all up so that it will make sense. Hold on just 1 second while I get away from the slime molds. My Lightroom is functioning so poorly. An input usually has a few seconds before it does anything. I think I've finally bogged this computer down to where it won't operate the way it's supposed to. I can't even scroll through the pictures in Lightroom right now, and I haven't had a chance to export them because, as you know, been busy. But we'll take a look at some of the early shots, and then we'll get into the later stuff. Let me see if I can open up a couple of these. The first thing that is probably going to strike you was the first thing that struck me was the amount of chromatic aberration when I was testing the Zeiss Luminar at 20x. Was absolutely mind-boggling. Was not expecting this. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Hopefully you can still hear me. That would be nice. This is just one example, and as we go through the stack. All of the stacks were done the same way. They're all as small as possible, and I did them basically in PMax because these are not DMAPy kind of images to stack. But you can see that the purple discoloration is not actually the color of the traces on these chips. As a look at the Mitutoyo image will show you in a little bit, this is all chromatic aberration. And let's get in a bit closer and let me show you what I mean. Even as we get into the sharp zone focus wise, which I think we just went through actually, yeah, the amount of fringing is really amazing. And yeah, there was very little of this in the Mitutoyo images, which is problematic. I mean, of course, when I went back and redid some of these photographs at 16 times magnification, there was considerably less of this ugly CA. Let me see, I'm showing you individual slices instead of the stacked images because I can't remember where I put the stacked images. They'll show up here in a minute. Oh dear, that's one of them right there. So this is the output from the luminar, and in addition to being really just eaten up with this chromatic aberration, it's also showing up at the edges and in the corners. The image is also very soft, and this was something that went on all the way up until I decreased decreased the magnification to 16 from 20. I'm not even going to show you these well, I guess I can show you these diatoms because they show the same thing. That's not the final. This is just some diatoms that I photographed with both systems, and this is one image where I tried to kill some of the purple with the adjustments in Lightroom, and I couldn't do it. I mean, the fringing was just so heavy on the horizontal high contrast surfaces that it just ruined all of these pictures, which were terrible anyway. But yeah, I was just looking for something different to show. And then I started taking pictures of these complicated wire structures that I told you about, which give lots of different crossover angles for the various components. I think that's my output. Let's see. Yeah, and the difference here was a little more subtle because there was more to look at, and I must say that this is the luminar. I rather liked the way it represented the subtle tones in the wires. These wire things were not clean. They're tiny, 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 by the way. They're just a few. Each piece of this wire is thinner than a human hair, so they're very small. They're also a bit dirty and scratched up, but you can see these lovely tonal grades which don't show up nearly as clearly with the Mitutoyo. The Mitutoyo, on the other hand, doesn't have any of the CA that you see with the luminar lens. Don't see too much in here. I think it's a result of the lighting. Let's go on and look at a couple of the others. There were hang on, this looks like a completed one here. Yeah, dirty though it is, this was one of the first ones I did with the luminar, and correction, this is the Mitutoyo. My bad. I should have checked that. This is the Mitutoyo, and yep, and none of the fringing, and yeah, it's a problem P-Max picture because I do have some flare from the boosted contrast. This is a notoriously difficult subject because these are layers upon layers of wire. Some of the wires are underneath, some go in and out between the layers. But while it's not a very pretty picture, it at least shows you're getting more detail. You're getting considerably more detail, even though that detail is dirt and you might not want to see it, than you would with the Luminar. Okay, so after confusing you with that, suffice to say that I immediately agreed that the amount of visible resolution, what we can appreciate, is very much greater with the Mitutoyo. So this is another example. This was actually one that I made this photograph specifically to use as the cover art for this video, because I love the different colors. When you heat these wires, they change color, and I like the look and the feel of this. And this was shot with the Zeiss Luminar. Yeah, I was happy with it. It could have used a lot of post-production, which it didn't get, but again, it's you have to set your expectations right when you're using lenses that you're having them do things that they weren't designed to do, is basically what it comes down to. So what is this here? This is this was another coil, much more simple coil, but I can't even see where the output is for it. It might be all the way at the bottom. Let me see, because I renamed them. We shall see. There should be a whole batch of the of the finished images all together. See how slow it is? Don't know why. We'll look at some of the individual frames because I didn't get a chance to stack all of these. So let's look at just a couple of them, if it'll even open them for me. This is the last batch of photographs that I did with the Luminar, and I was really pretty happy with these, but it's a much simpler photograph. Let me find where the focus is a little closer to us. I will stack this tonight. Yeah, it's the depth of field, by the way, the depth of focus is so incredibly shallow with both of these lenses, but it's really difficult to get anything completely flat so the whole thing is in focus at the same place, and I don't think that's going to be the case here anywhere. But you can see it's fairly decent, fairly sharp. And that's as good as I can really say about the Zeiss. It is fairly sharp. It's not spectacular at anything except producing some really off-putting chromatic aberration at under the right circumstances. So let's see. Some of these have been stacked. You can tell, and this was the oh, you know what? They're probably still in Zerine. Yes, they are. Okay, that's pretty bad. But this is the let me see. This is the Luminar again, and yeah, and I guess until I get some properly finished images, it's not going to do a whole lot of good to show you these partial stacks. Let me see if I can find the processed JPEGs that I put in a file for this very purpose. Let me see if I can get that turned off so that I can dig through my files without you having to sit through it. So I'll tell you what. We'll look at the others. We'll look at the other pictures in a minute. I want to get through all of this stuff so we can wrap this up once and for all. Use the same stacking software. Obviously, I use Zerine. I used the same step lengths that were calculated very, very, very conservatively. At 16 or 20x, I was using a 1 micron step length. And I was optimizing for no vibration, and I was treating it like a real photograph. The one thing that clearly suffered in trying to match the rigs was the lighting. They are two different beasts to light. To light the subject with the Mitutoyo, you have a ridiculous 21 millimeters of working distance. I use a hood on my objective, which halves the working distance, but still gives me 12 or so millimeters to work with for lighting, which is plenty. Remember that this objective has a numeric aperture of 0.42. It is going to gobble up light from wherever it can get it, and the picture is nice and bright. It's easy to work with, but trying to get that same lighting with the Zeiss was well nigh impossible. The Zeiss is fairly fat at the end. It doesn't have any relief at the end to let light in, so you're basically having to bring your light in directly across the front of the objective. Now, I don't know if that was partially responsible for some of the flare and some of the other unpleasant, I guess you'd call them, the flare was so common with the Zeiss that I thought I'd had the lenses mixed up a couple of times. But there was so much of it that it was very hard to figure out whether it was my lighting technique. I have tried several other lighting setups with it and have yet to find one that's really giving me the kind of lighting control I can get with a lens hood, multiple lights and diffusers with the system I have for the Mitutoyos. The other thing is I like to use a lot of individual light sources. I would rather use 6 very, very low power light sources, or flashes for that matter, around a subject so that I can control the directionality and the balance of the light, where it's coming from. You just can't do that with this. You have to shine the light in where the little crack is. That's it. That's where your light has to go. You move it anywhere else to get a different angle and the light disappears, because there is such a little space between the lens and the subject. It really is like using any other finite conjugate microscope objective as a camera lens. They're just not made for that. They're not made to be camera lenses. They're made to be microscope objectives. So anyway, the common pitfalls, I think, in you're doing a test like this, you're making a comparison, was the first thing I did was mess up the magnification. It makes a big difference. Your magnification needs to be the same, and it's well nigh impossible the way I had it set up to produce 2 images that you could put side by side, like you would expect to see on Robert O'Toole's website, where the images are otherwise identical, and you can focus on the aberrations, you can focus on the the chromatic interference. You just can't do that with these pictures because they are so different, because of the weirdness of the lighting and the necessary changes in everything as I went along. So the different lighting angles, the different magnifications, any stacking differences between the two, they were all problematic. I didn't sharpen, I didn't sharpen any of them. I left them just the way they came out of the camera. Probably should have done for some. All right, so the full frame. I use full frame for everything. And one of the things that is striking is how big the coverage is from the Zeiss Luminar. It is made, I think, for using with 4x5 view cameras, that crazy big photographic plates. So it's not surprising that it well covers a full frame sensor. That is not absolutely the case with the Mitutoyo. In some instances, there would be a tiny little bit of vignetting. Honestly, I can't find the examples that I had with some vignettes on them. But if you've used the 20X, you just shoot for it. You know that that's going to be the case, and you frame your subject to the center of the frame. You can always crop it. There wasn't a great deal of difference. I have, if this experiment has taught me anything, it's taught me how much I really love using Mitutoyo objectives. They are so beautifully corrected, and they handle chromatic aberration and spherical aberration so well. They're so predictable, and with a properly designed lens hood, they're so versatile. That is just not the case with the Zeiss. As much fun as it was to put it through its paces, I think I would get a bit panicky if I thought that's what I had to use, because it's very hit and miss. Edge sharpness. Well, I tell you what, let's talk briefly about the whole idea of the MTF, because I spent a lot of time looking for a modulation transfer function graphs for each of these lenses. As far as I can tell, Mitutoyo doesn't actually produce one. It produces something similar to one. Let me see if I can find what they have on their website. Yeah, here it is. And it's not real impressive, and it looks like it's kind of a generalization. But this is their Plan APO long working distance objectives. This is the ones we're talking about, and they do have a truly impressive MTF curve. What you want to see, are you familiar with MTF curves? You may not be. I certainly wasn't back in the day. But this is each of their objectives and how they perform on this curve. The way the curve represents the performance of the lens is it basically tells you at different levels of spatial frequency how well is contrast preserved in the detail of the image, if that makes sense. It's a very complicated concept, but it's very helpful to think of it in a fairly simple terms. Is it describes how well any given lens will preserve contrast at different levels of detail. Now, the levels of detail, this is the contrast on the vertical axis, and this is the amount of detail on the horizontal axis. So the perfect lens, or not the perfect lens, a very high performing lens will start out the curve being very high, and it will remain flat for a very long time before it gradually dips down as the amount of detail increases, and the amount of contrast at that increasing detail begins to fade. That's all this shows. And not being able to compare an MTF curve for the Zeiss Luminar, it was a little difficult to make any meaningful comparisons. Though I did find a sketch of one. I don't know where the data came from, so I'm not going to show it. But this is what you would want to see in a high performing lens, or in this case a high performing group of lenses. And how well a lens preserves contrast as the amount of detail increases is really what it's all about. I mean, that's every lens is going to show large features well. I mean, that's not a particularly difficult thing to design, but lenses struggle more and more as the detail gets smaller. Preserving contrast in that detail is what we perceive as sharpness in a lens. So, to reiterate, the horizontal axis, the x-axis. Let me show you that again. The horizontal axis along the bottom here is big features on the left, as in low frequency of detail, all the way to the right where the features are teeny tiny and very high frequency, it's called. And on the vertical axis, which is contrast, at the bottom there is no contrast, everything just becomes gray. And at the top there is very high contrast where blacks remain black, whites remain white, and there is no graying out between the two. So that's all these things do. We make them more complicated by adding additional curves that tell you different stuff. But just know this: if you're looking at a lens and trying to decide whether or not you want to buy it, look for a lens that starts, a lens with a curve, I should say, that starts near the top, that stays high for a long time, and then drops slowly off the edge of the curve. If you see that, it tells you that that lens is capable of preserving contrast even in very, very fine detail. Eventually it will get beaten by the detail, but the longer it can stay flat and the more gently it drops off at the on the right edge, that is a very fine lens. A weaker lens may start high, it may start up here, but it will immediately start to drop. As soon as you start increasing the amount of detail you want contrast in, it'll start to disappear. So fine detail loses its contrast and becomes invisible, and it is pretty nasty. So resolution is not just about seeing detail. It's about maintaining contrast within the detail, and that's what we perceive as sharpness, and that's what the MTF curve is telling us if we take the time to look at it. So now, looking at these two lenses, I did read some descriptions of the MTF curves, which is a pretty poor substitute for actually looking at them myself. But there were a couple of things I thought I'd share with you. These Zeiss Luminar lenses are designed as photomacrographic lenses, so they're made for high resolution, high contrast imaging at specific magnifications of 2 through 10x or 16x in our case, rather than standard infinity conjugate systems that we're usually talking about. So traditional MTF charts have never been published as far as I can tell. If they have, I couldn't find them anywhere, and I searched for ages today looking for them. But they're known for their exceptional performance, these Zeiss Luminar lenses, but we don't have the graph to show it. They're all of these lenses are optimized for the magnification they're used at, like the 16 is optimized for 16x. The various versions might be different. Don't take what I'm saying as fact for all 16mm luminars. There are several versions with different coatings and different glass. Some of the lenses, they're all supposedly good for producing good contrast in highly detailed areas, but I don't know. Haven't seen the graphs. And Savatsi, I don't know if you know a guy named Savatsi who does a lot of lens reviews and or lens analyses. he's talked extensively about these lenses, and he describes them as being great for reproducing high frequency detail with lots of contrast. But he agrees, as does everybody I've read, that these things have some horrible chromatic aberration as soon as you get out of the optimized window or the optimum window for performance. So there you get it. Now, if you read what has been written about the MTF curves that don't exist on the Zeiss lens, most people will describe it as showing excellent mid-frequency performance. So it has a nice flat area in the middle of the curve, but contrast begins to fall off fairly quickly, and it falls off faster and faster as the detail frequency goes up. So that explains why fine detail using the Luminar lens gets soft quite quickly. Add to that the possibility that you've also closed the aperture a little bit. You can understand why softness becomes a major limiting factor with this lens. So it's designed for photographic film reproduction, where it's limited by the grain in the film, and that's probably a good place for it to stay. The Mitutoyo 20X has ridiculously high contrast at the mid frequencies of detail, but it remains high contrast way up into higher frequencies of detail. So it really does do what it says on the bottle. It's designed for high resolution, and that's exactly what it gives you. So the Luminar resolves fine detail well, but the Mitutoyo resolves fine detail brilliantly well. And if that's important to you, then bear that in mind. My goodness, it's 9 o'clock already. Let me cut out some of this MTF stuff. Well, no, this is important. Two lenses can resolve the same detail, yet one of them can be sharper than the other. Why is that? Both are detecting the detail, but the better lens is the one that preserves the contrast within that detail. So you can have the detail or the detail with contrast, and that's what our eye sees as sharpness, and it's what our brains tell us is a better lens when we see that. So it's worth thinking about. I was going to talk all about sagittal and meridional curves and how the two curves mean different things, but we won't go there because it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference in these lenses. But I did want to tell you about the differences between the two if we had actual curves to look at. So why does the Mitutoyo cost so much? It's because it is a precision instrument that's made for incredibly important stuff like surveilling computer chips as they're being fabricated. It corrects multiple wavelengths of color. It has minimal chromatic aberration, hardly noticeable even when you push it. It's full of weird glass like fluorite, and it has these extra dispersion elements in there, and highly reflective refractive index materials. It's just full of weird and expensive glass, and it has loads of elements because of its apochromatic correction. The market size is relatively decent, but it's not mass market. I mean, we tend to get them, you can buy them from Mitutoyo, but we generally buy them on the used market after they've done their stint in industry. But they're used in the semiconductor industry, they're used in medical research, they're used in materials science, and they're worth $2,500. They are worth every penny of it because they are so good at what they do. The Luminar doesn't. It doesn't have those things. It does have, it's simple. It has the aperture control. It costs maybe a fifth down to a tenth of the price, and it's flexible, and it's fun to use. It's a conversation piece. I'm running out of things to say about it, but if I had to take a photograph of something at 20x, I would go get my Mitutoyo. I think you probably would too. The subtle differences in tone and color, they're nice, and I can appreciate them in some of the photographs. But I'm more into the accuracy and the precision of the Mitutoyo objective. Much more expensive for a reason, would be my guess. Well, I've had to cut off the end. I knew I'd do this if there was too much stuff in here, but I do apologize for not getting to everything. Just at the end of the day, if somebody gives you a Zeiss Luminar, use it and enjoy it and have fun with it and figure out things that it will be great for. But if you absolutely have to have a super sharp, super predictable, super reliable 20x microscope objective, buy the Mitutoyo. I will lend you the money, but it will be very high interest rate. No, I won't. I was just kidding. I don't have any to lend, and it's tax season. So let me say globally hi to everybody who came. I'm sorry I was so frazzled getting this started tonight. I didn't have a chance to see who was here. And seeing as we're out of time, I will just say goodnight to everybody as well, and urge you to come on Thursday when things will be fun and light-hearted and involve lots of compositing. And if you can't make that, come to Tangent on Saturday. It's free and it's fun, and Larry and I will be there, and we'll be talking 3D stuff. So thank you very much for coming. I do appreciate each and every one of you, and again, sorry that this dragged out. Joseph, I'm going to read all of your comments, of which there are, it appears to be several million. As soon as I get done here, I'll read them so that I know precisely what you're saying, and and I will comment on them on Thursday if need be. But thank you for coming, and thank you for making those comments. All right, I got to go. You've got to go as well. Sorry about the phone ringing. It thinks I must be through because it's after 9, and I will catch up with you on Thursday. Thank you again. Take care. Good night.